Okay, this is what we are painting today. I have titled this Dream, obviously. It's a wood arrow, will be new on my surface. I hope that you enjoy this video. Please subscribe and like if you are watching on my YouTube channel, and I appreciate every one of you and try to respond to all of your comments. So if you have any comments, please leave them below. This is very quick. It's just a silhouette design, and it's very fast, so let's get to it. Okay, I am so ready to paint with you today. It's been a while since I've done a video and painted with you guys, so I am excited to start this design for you. Now, this is a new surface that's going to be on my website. It's not on there yet, but it will be. I have, to prep this surface, I have applied a coat of multi-purpose sealer on the whole thing, both sides, and then I applied 2 coats of light buttermilk, all with my, here it is, my artist sponge. Okay, so it's dry now. I want to very, very lightly sand this on both sides. And then I'm going to wipe off my sanding dust with my paper towel. Okay, I'm going to move this to the side because we're going to get ready to apply some paper to it, but I wanted to show you what to do to get your paper ready. So I'm using this scrapbooking paper that has writing on it. These are easily available just about any time of the year from Hobby Lobby or Michael's. I like to buy my paper at Hobby Lobby because they have a much larger selection of paper. But this one seems to stay within the grouping of papers for a long time. It's not one that they rotate out. They might bring in one that's a little bit different in, but they always seem to have some kind of paper that has writing on it. They have some that has a little bit wider background, which is fine. So these two are exactly the same here. And then this one has a little bit more of a yellowish color. So for this one I'm using light buttermilk, but if you get a paper that's more like this color, you'd want to use regular buttermilk to base coat your surface. And if you get one that has more of a white background, you would want to obviously use white on your surface. So to get our paper cut the size that we need, we are going to lay it on the back side of the paper and get our point at the edge of the paper there. And then this will just fit on here on a diagonal here. Make sure you're all in the camera shot here. And then we're just going to take a pencil and trace around it. Okay, we'll take this off, and then we've got our lines on there to cut our surface. I've actually drawn one on here. It's a little bit darker. And then all we're going to do is cut it out right on that line all the way around. If when you get done and you apply yours and it doesn't quite fit, you know, it's a little short, a little long, don't worry, we can adjust for both. So I'm going to go off camera and finish cutting this out and come back and show you how we're going to apply it. Okay, I've got mine all cut out here, and we're going to get ready to adhere it onto here. If it's a little long, no problem. Even if it's short, it's not a problem, because we're going to be adding some layers onto this and doing a little bit to it. Okay, I had to turn my heater off. I was starting to roast in here. Okay, so these little pieces I'm just going to throw in my recycle bin. But these larger pieces we want to keep because we want to cut out some pieces off of it. So we're going to mark them while we're doing our cutting. We want them to be 1 1/4 inches. So actually I'm not going to mark it. I'm going to do it a much easier way. You can mark it or we're going to use our little cutting thing here. So 1 1/4. And then we're going to cut all of our pieces 1 1/4. I want to make sure that's straight. That's more of a square. I want more of a rectangle, so I think we'll go 1 1/2. Okay, I like that better. So we're going to cut, how many letters do I need here? 1, 2, 3, 4. We need 5 squares, cut 1 1/4 by 1 1/2. I think I cut that last one quite straight. Okay, there's 3. We're going to have to cut a new piece of paper, so we want to cut this next strip 1 1/4. And then 1 1/2. So that's 4. I need one more. If they're not all perfectly the same size, that's okay. Alright, this goes into my recycle bin. And then I will save this to use possibly on another project. Those pieces are big enough to use somewhere else. So, these pieces we're just going to set aside. We will use them much later in the project. So, for this piece, now we're going to get ready to adhere it on here. Alright, so we want to get our decoupage for paper out. And I'm going to get me a bigger brush, flat brush here. Oops. Okay, dampen your brush. Get our decoupage medium open. This one is specifically for paper, but you can use the regular decoupage medium as well. This happens to be my favorite one. I'm going to have to shake this up, it looks like. All the glue is settled to the bottom. So we'll definitely shake that up so it's good. The regular one, which is thicker, is, you probably don't have to shake it near as much. It's quite a bit thicker. It's just a regular decoupage. Of course, you probably can't see down in there, but it's a thicker one. And they have outdoor decoupage. They have antiquing decoupage. DecoArt has a lot of decoupage products. So I'm going to apply a very nice, somewhat generous, but not too generous, because we don't want it oozing over the sides here when we go to press our paper on. But we want every piece of the paper to be stuck, especially on our edges. So as quickly as you can, apply this. Okay, I'm also going to put a quick coat on this paper. You don't have to do it on the paper as well. I want to make sure it gets good and stuck, so I'm just going to give it a quick coat. This is a Paper Studios paper, by the way, in case you wanted to know what brand it was. From from Hobby Lobby. I don't generally buy my paper at Michael's just because they don't have as good of a selection, I don't think. Okay, now this is where you got to get it on there, because I have glue on both sides. It is going to adhere to this board very quickly. So you're not going to have time to be adjusting and moving. If you do it without the paper on the back, or the glue on the decoupage on the back of the paper, you will have a little bit more time. Okay, that's as close as I'm going to get it there. So I'm going to take, this is just a scraping tool, probably used for a kitchen, to scrape pans or whatever. I'm not really sure what it's specifically meant for. I just know that I've had one for quite a while. Alright, so I'm going to use this to kind of bray it down, get that glue working on there. I can see up here on the front I don't have enough glue, so I'll just take my brush and brush that on. I want to make sure I don't have any air bubbles in here. I'm very gently pushing this because I don't want to tear my paper. Rub my hand on and see if I feel any air bubbles in there. One right there, which I can't see, but I could feel it. Just gently push it out. A little one right there. Push them towards the edge so they can come out. If when it's dry you've got one in there, you can poke a hole in it and put a little bit of glue and push it down and flatten it. So my paper is over the edge, but I'll show you how to fix that. On this side is, you know, right up on it. So alright, I'm going to let this completely dry before we go to our next step on this. So be patient with it. It will dry pretty quickly. See if the bottle has a time frame on it. Let's see. Dry between coats about 20 minutes. Let dry and cure a minimum of 24 hours before use. Well, we're not going to be using it. We're going to be painting on it. So I would say if 20 minutes before you can apply the next coat, I would say give it an hour, and that ought to be dry enough for us to come back and start painting on it. I know when you're starting a project, the last thing you want to do is wait to get going on it, but you want it to come out right, to be nice. So this will be the time to gather up your paints. Make sure you've got all your brushes out, everything that you want to or need to use in this. Get your squares cut and all that stuff. And take your time to get all of that stuff together. Maybe there's another surface that you're going to be painting later. You can go and prep that surface and get it ready for your next project. That's what I do when I'm waiting for one surface to dry to get ready for me to move on to the next step. I'm prepping another surface that I know I'm going to be painting something else later. So that's just a good tip for you to do. So let's get it dry and come back and get going. Okay, mine is still drying. One step I wanted to show you was these holes here for if you're going to hang it. If you're not going to hang it, then don't worry about poking the paper through those holes. But you want to find where the hole is and take a toothpick or something fairly sharp. It's best if you do this while the paper is slightly damp. You don't want to tear the paper, but you don't want to have it coming up. Mine was starting to dry just a little bit too much, I think. So I've got one hole there, and then the other one is over here. So I'm just going to take the toothpick and kind of wiggle it in that hole so I can get it opened up. There we go. Alright, so that's if you want the holes for hanging it to be showing. If not, if you're planning on putting it in a stand or something, it'll have to be a fairly tall stand because of this end here, but that's how you poke the holes through on that. Alrighty, let's work on this. We got our paper dry here, so I'm going to dampen a paintbrush. Now, right here, I have my paper is hanging over the edges, and I want to remove that. So what I'm going to do is take a damp brush and wet my paper right there. And I'll wet it on both sides. And a little bit hanging over here. And the rest of it looks pretty good. So I'm going to dampen it on the top side as well. Let the water kind of soak in to the paper a little bit. You don't want to let it go too far onto your paper. And then we're going to take a emery board and just begin to file it off in a downward motion. I don't have enough water on here yet. I should have probably let it soak into the water soak into the paper a little bit. And it should just come right off. Oops. A couple of pieces there that don't want to disconnect. A little bit more water there. It should come off fairly easy, so if you're working too hard at it, it's not wet enough. And in doing this too, you might remove a little bit of your paint off of the edge. But you can go back and touch that up. Got this side a little bit too wet. Okay, now I'll finish this side here. And we can get busy painting. Just a downward, gentle stroking. You don't have to scrub it. We're just removing the excess paper, so don't get too wild. Got that edge just a little bit too damp, but alright, let me clean up my paper here. And then we're going to do some vintage effects on this. Okay, so I have, this is a white vintage wash, and this one is black. So I want to put a little bit of each one of these on my plate here. I'm just going to use a spoon, put some out. Made a mess there with that one. I'm going to wipe my spoon off so I'm not transferring my white into my black here. And I'll put a little bit of this out. Not really sure how much of this I'll need. Probably not too much of it, I wouldn't think. Spoon off again. Okay, let's get our arrow back over here. I'm going to take my artist sponge again and dampen it. Bring out the excess water. Okay, now I'm going to go into my vintage white here. And I want to put this all over the top. I'll kind of take the letters down a little bit so they're not quite so bold. We'll still have that writing that we can see. Okay, now I'm going to just turn my sponge around and go into some black. The Vintage Effects. And I want to put this along the edge. Just want to kind of dirty and rough it up. And I'm kind of blending it in. I'll probably come back and repeat this when this dries because I want it to be a little bit darker than that. Kind of blend it out. This starts drying pretty quickly, so you need to work it as quick as you can. Okay, so we've got kind of an aged little sign here, but I'm going to let this dry completely, and then we're going to come back and add more black because I really want that darker around the edges, and then we're going to add some other colors on top here. Okay, this is pretty much dry. Now remember, we're working on paper. You cannot scrub on this because you'll just scrub a hole right into your paper. So now I am going to, so far we've used the regular acrylic paints, we've used the DecoArt medium, and we've used the Vintage Effects washes. Now I want to use some media acrylic paints. And I've got just a little bit out here on my palette. I've got Cobalt Teal Hue. And this is Ultramarine Blue. And this one is Cerulean Blue. I don't know. I know I'm going to use the teal one. I don't know about the others. Now this paint is very pigmented, so we don't need very much of it. I've got water in my brush so I can thin it down. And we're just going to start applying this onto our background in some washes. Water. Just wherever you would like to put some. I've got a lot of water in my brush here and not a whole lot of paint. I'll take some of this whitewash and kind of thin some of it down. And if you have some white paint, which I might put some white paint out here, just regular white paint, because that will probably give me more of the look that I want to go for. But I still want to keep that white thin down, because I don't want it to be opaque. I do want some lighter stuff in here. That's almost a little bit too much there. We're going to come back and redo the edges here, so not to worry. Get some more of that turquoise, but I want to make sure it's thin there. Try some of this blue here, Cerulean Blue. This is our background still, so I know it looks messy and not very appealing right now, but we'll get there. We'll go get some more white here. Maybe just a scooch more white in the mix. I'll go for some more of this Cerulean Blue. I removed the paint out of my brush and dampened my brush here so I could kind of move this media paint a little bit before it dried. I've got a bubble in my paper right there. Alright, this is some white. I just kind of want a sky looking background here. that ultramarine blue is going to be too dark, so I'm not going to try it because that's not really the color I'm wanting to go with. Wipe the paint off, get a little bit of water in my brush, and go again. And you can just keep building on this until you build the kind of sky area like you want it to look. A little bit more water in my brush here for my white. So I'm just using these three colors. Got way too much paint now. That's the white, the cobalt teal hue in media paint. Now the white is just regular acrylic paint, but if you have a white in the media paint, then go ahead and use that. Okay, I'm going to wipe my brush off so I can come back in and blend this out. Go into some of this blue and get some water. Blend it out, and I need some more white in here, especially through here. I feel like it's become just an all blue arrow there. We can still see our writing on our letters, so we're good there. So let's get some color up here on the ends. Clean my brush out and take that white out, and gently blend this. Go into some more of this. I want to mix some water with it because I don't want it to come off my brush real heavy here. Kind of back on the brush, just tickling it across here. And I really don't know if I'm going to put any of that vintage black back in. I think I might leave it that way. I like that darker underneath those blues. That really looks nice. Oh, my paper lifted there, so I'm going to have to re-glue that. Okay. Just some washes of color. That's all we're doing there. Okay, I think that looks pretty good for our background. I like that, so I'm going to let this dry completely. It's pretty dry now, but I'm going to let it completely dry and get my pattern on. And after I get everything painted, I might come back and use that vintage effect on the outside edge, or I might just use black. So I'll decide that once we get everything painted on here. So let it dry, get your pattern on. Okay, this is going to be a super fun, super fast project. We all have seen the paintings of the birds on a wire. So that's basically what we're doing here, but we're adding some different elements on here. So we're going to paint our birds in with black. So you can just use a small round brush or a filbert brush and just fill them in with black. Not the beak. We'll do the beak here in a second with a little bit lighter color. And we'll probably have to put 2 coats on here, it looks like. I had a little bit too much water in my brush, so it kind of thinned my paint down a little bit more than what I wanted. Get this one painted in black. These can be whatever kind of birds you want them to be. But they're kind of like in the shadows here. A little bit of water. So I'll come back and put a second coat on there. I can go off camera and do that. This is going to be a pretty short project, so I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of camera time here. Putting some white out because I want to mix a little bit of gray for the beak. So I'm just going to take some white and mix it into my black and make a dark to medium value gray. And we'll just paint in our beaks here. Alright, let's get a second coat on those birds real quick. Some different layers on those tail feathers. We don't want them all to be the same length here. Okay, let's do the other one here. Kind of be up on the very chisel edge of the brush, which is the tip of the bristles, to get those tail feathers and keep them nice and thin there at the very end of them. Let's put our beak in again with that gray mix. You can't clean up if you get out of lines on this, so try not to do that. There's not too many elements to actually paint on this, so you don't have to do too much. I'm going to add a little bit more white to that dark gray, and we're going to put a little eye on them. You don't need a bright white line on there, so don't give them a bright white beak. Messed my black up there, so let me fix that. Okay, so over here on this part, this is my wire coming through here, right through there. Over here on this side, we're going to have our boxes or rectangles that we cut out, and we're going to place letters within these boxes. I need to move them over. I don't want them all straight up and down, so It's okay if one hangs up above the, you know, if one's turned and it's hanging up above the wire. We don't want it super turned, but I'm just having a hard time keeping these under control here. Okay, so there is our boxes for our letters. And let's untilt that one a little bit. Okay, starting to look a little bit too straight up and down here. And I don't want that look. Okay, that's probably a good place for them to be. Let me get a pencil. So I want to draw a line from the center of each one of these. And then on the back, I'm going to number them. This is number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. And number 5. Okay, so we can make sure that when we put them back on here, they're going back in the place where we need them to go. Okay, we're going to draw our line in next, and we're going to put that in with some black. And actually, I think we'll mix some white and make that dark gray kind of like we did with the beak, maybe just a touch darker than the beak. So it comes from over here. I'm just using a round brush here. I can see my line. Come back and add some highlighting onto this. Okay, so there's our wire for our birds on a wire, although that is not what this piece is titled, so we're going to come back and add some colors onto our birds here too in a little bit. Okay, I want a little bit more of this turquoise in here, so I'm just going to brush some in here and then take my finger and blend it out, because I just don't feel like there's quite enough color in here. Just some places where I definitely want it to be a little bit brighter. No hard lines in here. That's kind of why I'm rubbing it out with my finger, so we won't get any of those hard lines. And I'm going to put a little bit up in here because I feel like it's kind of a dead space there. It's a little bit more paint than it was water, so it looks pretty good. So if you feel like me, that you didn't get quite enough color back in there, then that's how we can add some of that back in there. And I still may want to come back and add more of the cerulean blue here in a little bit, but I have to let that dry before I attempt to do that. Okay, I'm going to set this aside now so we can work on the squares for a moment. So I practiced on a piece of the paper here how I want it to look. I want to give some washy effects to these papers here. So in order to do that, now this paper is just scrapbook paper. It is not watercolor paper. So you can't do exactly the same thing you can with watercolor paper, but we can get pretty close. So I'm going to take a large brush. You can use any large brush that you have. This is a 3/4 inch brush. Okay, I'm going to do this on a piece of scrap paper first, like I did there, and kind of show you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to dampen this very well, and then go into some of my color and immediately put it into that wet area, and then get out of it, because you'll start balling up the paper if you go in it too much. And then I wash my brush off in clean water. So if my water's dirty, I'm going to wash it, and then I'm going to go into some clean water and dampen it, so that I'm not transferring dirty water over here. And we're going to get some of this blue and just kind of wash it on. Get out of it. We're just going to make some subtle colors. I probably want a little bit darker. I like how dark it is over here, so I'm probably going to want it a little bit darker. But we're just going to do that randomly on these squares here. So let me wash my brush out, and I am going to dampen it. That is a lot of water. Excuse me. I'm going to go into my pink here. Put some of that in. This is primary magenta in the media paints. Wash my brush. I'm going to go into this one and put a little bit of that on there. And I must not have enough water in my brush, because it left that little hard line right there, but we'll work it out when we put our blue on there. Wash my brush out. My brush is loaded with water. I'm going to dampen this. That's a lot of water on there. Come back with my red. Primary magenta is this color. Okay, I'm washing my brush, dampening my paper, getting some pigment, and applying it. Wash the brush. Dampen. Not enough water in my brush here. Dampen it. Grab some of that primary magenta and apply it on there. Okay, now I'm going to have to let that dry a little bit before I come back and try and put the blue on it. This one wasn't very wet, so I'm going to put the blue on this one. So I'm going to dampen it, go into my blue, and put some of that on there. We'll just get a little touch of both of those colors on our paper, and I might try it a different way, so I'm going to just thin down my blue paint here, which is that same blue we used on the background, and just come in here and tap some of this on here. We want it to have soft edges. We don't want any hard places on there. Okay, that one's mostly pink, but I think it will be okay once it dries. Okay, so I'm going to let those dry, so I'm just going to tear this piece of palette paper off so they can dry. And we'll move on to more detail here on our piece. So let's get it back up here where we need it. Alright, so on our birds here, we want to get a little bit of feather look on them. So I think we'll take our black and some white. Get this out of my palette here. And I'm just going to make like a gray color, dark gray, probably pretty close to what we did on the beaks here. So I'm just going to use a, let me grab a liner brush because I want to put a line on the beaks. Give them just a little bit of detail. So I'm going to take a liner and thin some paint down. Now we just do that by adding some water to it, pulling it out, thinning it down. We don't need very much of this. Touch my tip of my brush to my paper towel, and then we'll just come in here and give them a separation in their beaks there. Just a little bit of detail. That's all we need there. Okay, so for our feathers, we're going to take some black and white and mix it on our brush, on the toe of our brush here, little corner. Get a gray. Oops, too much white. A little bit more black. There's a nice dark gray right there. I'm going to spritz my paper, I always do, with some water, because when I need water, I just go over here so I can pick up clean water on the edge of my brush. You work the water in the same way you do the paint. Okay, so we just want to create the look of some wings on here. Put that on, and then I'll come over here and work on this one. And then we'll just kind of, maybe not that big, streak some lines on here. And we don't need much more than that. I'm going to go into some straight black here and blend that out just a little bit. Don't want it to be quite so big and bold there. Bit of that gray on the tail feathers, and I think we'll do just a touch of it on the top of their heads if I have enough left here on my palette to do that. We'll highlight. I'm not sure I like how that looks, so I'm going to let that set for a minute and think about that, because I may come back and change that completely. Okay, these lines that I created here are for some clothespins, and they go onto our paper. Our paper's here, if I can see my lines. These are going to take a little bit to dry. On the line, we drew it on to here. So we are going to paint our clothespins with some black and just a small round brush. I have a number 2. So I made my brush look flat on the end just by, when I loaded it like this instead of, let me show you. I loaded it by pushing it flat instead of just dabbing in the paint and keeping a round tip. Because if I just dab in the paint, I've just got my round tip. But when I lay the brush down, I've got a flat brush. And you want a good round brush that will, when you load it this way, will stay flat. It will give you a flat line, like a small flat brush would. it won't bounce right back to that round shape. But you can turn it back into that round shape very easily. Okay, so we just want to we want to keep that line in the center of our paintbrush as we paint this. And we're just going to create the tops of some clothespins. They're going to continue down onto our paper. But we'll go ahead and get these in. Might make this one a little bit wider. Keep that line in the center so we'll have our placement correct for our papers when we come back and put them on. Make this one a little bit taller here. I think I made it too wide. It's a little bit of a wide one there. Remember, we're painting on top of paper, so if we make an error, it's going to be difficult to fix. So we want to try not to make any errors on here. Okay, I've decided I do not like how those birds look, so I'm going to paint them back in with some black and change it up with that gray a little bit. Something there. Just get them all black again. And then we're going to let everything dry because we really need to get that paper dry. Oops. So we'll get everything good and dry here. I think we might paint a foot on here because I think we'll be able to see that just a little bit. So we'll do that dark gray like we did the beak. And we'll just put some probably use a liner brush to do this. Just kind of the illusion of some feet there. We don't have to be too specific with that. We're just making an illusion. And maybe a little bitty teeny tiny highlight on the eye. These can be any kind of bird that you want them to be. It's a silhouette, so I'm not being too specific about the shape or their, features or anything because it's just a silhouette of the birds. So I think I'm going to take this dark gray and put it on the chest. Again, it's just a silhouette, so we don't have to be too specific with anything. And then just a little bit of it streak down their tails. And if you don't want to do any of that, then don't do it. You can just leave them solid black because they're just silhouettes. Okay, this is going to be a pretty fast, easy project. I'm going to go quickly dry my papers so we can come back and get the lettering on them and finish out the clothespins. Okay, I washed in just a little bit of that pink that we had really thinned down with water that we put on the paper. I put a little bit down here in the corner and then took my finger and really blended it out. And a little bit up in here. I think I'll put some over here. Just blend it out with my finger there. You can always come back in and add some more. I think that's going to be a nice, this is going to be completely covered up by our letters, so I'm not going to worry about any there. Just some little touches of that pink. I think that brings the background together nicely, since we'll be having that pink in our squares that go on here. Just a touch more on that tip. I want it to be a little bit bolder there. We're still working on the top of paper, even though we've applied some paints on here now, so that's kind of coating the paper, so we don't have to worry so much about damaging it, but we're still working on paper. So, you're just being gentle as you do this. Don't get too much. Okay, that's pretty good. I like that. Looks more like an evening sky to me. Okay. Our letters are still not quite dry, so we're going to have to let them get completely dry before we can transfer on our letters and paint them on. Then we're going to do some antiquing around the edge. We're going to do some antiquing around the edge of this piece. We'll adhere our letters, our squares, to our project as soon as they are dry, and we can get our letters on them. Alright, I've got my letters transferred onto my paper here. So now I'm just going to take my round brush and flatten it out like I did earlier for the clothespins. And we're just going to paint in all of our lettering with the lamp black. Remember, you're on paper, so try to stay within your lines. I tried to make these fairly simple letters. Okay, then you can use a detail liner, or just use the same brush and finish up your letters. Straighten that up, kind of got a little crooked. There you go, there's our first letter, and I'm just going to go through and paint all of these with lamp black. Okay, so now we want to shade around each block of paper. So you're going to take a dampened brush. I've just got a small 8 flat here. You're going to load a little bit of your paint in here. See, I've got plenty of water. That's a pretty washy little float. I'm going to touch my paper towel just slightly on that water edge. I don't want to remove too much water, but I don't want my paint going across my brush like that. And we're just going to very gently, I'm barely skimming over the paper. You gotta have the water in your brush though, so you don't leave any hard lines on your paper. And we're just going to do each one of these. You need to have those water drops on your palette. Wipe that off because I feel like I have paint all the way across on my bristles here. Just very lightly skim those corners, the edges. Plenty of water, very little paint. Black is a pretty strong color, so be careful with it. Okay, just kind of antiquing the edges here. So I'm going to go off camera and finish these other two. Okay, I got my letters all antiqued around the edges, so they're ready to go on. Now there's two ways that you can put these on. First of all, if you don't want to do paper and you just want to do the plain background, you can just draw these squares in at the angle that you want them and paint them and put the washes of color on there and then antique around the square. But if you're going to do the paper part, you can do it one of two ways. We're going to put decoupage medium for paper on the back of these and adhere them to the surface. Or if you want a more raised look, you can take, I think they still make these, I've had this forever because I don't do scrapbooking as much anymore, but these foam adhesive dots, you can take these and stick a couple on the back and have it be raised up off of the surface. So that is a personal preference to you, whatever you want to do. I'm going to get our scrap piece of paper back in here and a brush. And remember, we numbered these on the back so we would know which one went in what order and where to, what letter goes on each one. So I'm going to flip this over and dip into my decoupage medium and coat this generously on the back. And then figure out where I want to lay it, how I want it to lay. Now this one I had kind of tilted a little bit originally. So once you get it on there, it's on there. So I'm just going to press it down. Okay, we're going to do each letter. This one was tilted a little bit this way. Press it down really good. Get it stuck on there. This one, I believe I drew it straight up and down more for this one. Press it on good. Make sure you get a good amount of that glue on there. Not so much that it's, you know, oozing out from underneath, but where it's coated good so you can get good adhesion, especially on the edges. This one will go this way. And then one more. If you want them all to be straight, that you can do that. I wanted a little bit of movement kind of going on here, like maybe they were blowing in the wind a little bit. And then this one. Push it on there. That one I'm not sure I got enough glue on the edges. I've got my paper here that's coming up just a little bit on the edge here, so I'm going to take the glue on my brush and try and press that back down. Okay, so we've got those adhered on there. I'll clean our brush out really well. Then we're going to come in with our small round brush that we can flatten out. And we're going to finish painting our clothespin onto our squares here with our black. Just a little bit here. So this clothespin is going to come right there. I just want to cover all of that empty space. We'll do that on all of them. You go where your pencil line is. Getting a glare. Maybe I should get my easel thing back in here because I can't see what I'm doing. This lifts it up towards me so I can see it without the glare of the lights. This easel is from, you can get them at Artist Club. I think there's some other places that sell them too, but I'm not really sure what those places are. I want to try and keep our end of our clothespin square here, straight edge. I find it easier to pull towards me with this little bit of area. Okay, we've got those based in. Now we need to give them some detail. Okay, so let me draw on what I'm going to be doing here. So we want it to look like there is a top and a bottom to this clothespin. So we're going to have a line that comes down there, and then we're going to have some wire that kind of goes around the clothespin. Okay, so that's the back piece of the clothespin, and then we're going to have some wire. Okay, we're going to do that on all of them. So how we're going to get that is we're going to take a little bit of our white, and we're going to mix it with a black to get a gray color, a light, probably more medium value gray. Okay, and we're just going to kind of drag that along that edge. Make this one look like it's more on top. I don't have to be too precise there. A little bit more white in the mix there. And then we're just going to make our little wire things here. To add a white highlight on there, I think. So I'm going to dip into just my white, maybe, and get it to come off my brush. And we'll put a little bit of a highlight here along this edge. You can do this with a detail liner as well. So that's our little clothespins on there. Wide angle out a little bit. And then we want to do some antiquing around the edges like we did on the paper. So I'm going to get a much larger brush for this. Some fresh black out. Down here so you can see the whole thing a little bit better. And I'm just side loading a very damp brush. But I don't want that paint to go all the way across. So if I feel like it is, I'm going to wipe off and pick up a little bit of water and blend and work that into my brush. Okay, then we're just going to antique the edges. Need more paint, less water here. Now you could come back with this and antique the edges with that as well, since that's what we used initially. Either one would be just fine. It's coming off just a little bit too much. Go remove the excess water out of your brush. Because there I had just a little bit too much water. To darken the top edge, I think, here. Focus, focus, focus. And you can always repeat this and get it a little bit darker if you want it darker. Get some of that paint out of my brush there on the water edge. I don't want it going over quite that far. See where you need to add some more and touch up and blend out. That looks pretty good. And then to finish it off, I'm going to let it get completely dry. You can seal it with this, the same stuff, or just your regular varnish, which I like to use this one. So whatever varnish that you like to use, or whatever you like to put on top of it at the end, that's what you use, but you want to make sure everything's good and dry and adhered. And then you can use a wire or a cording to go through the top and hang it up. I think that might finish this piece. I might go back and darken up a little bit on my corners here. Try and stay off the background. Just a little scooch darker. We're still working on paper here, so you got to be careful. You got to have that water in your brush. I thought they were dark enough until we got our edges out there done. And I felt like they just needed a little bit more darkening. I'm just doing the corners unless I see an edge that is just really, really super light. Like this edge is just a little bit light for me. Maybe this edge. I'm going to stay off the background if I can. I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, I like that a lot. Okay, I think that is going to finish this project up. Pretty simple project. Shouldn't take you too much time to do it. What's going to take the longest is putting the paper on the background, and you can use any kind of paper that you like on the background and, you know, up in here. Or you can just use the paper here. You don't have to use it on the background. That's totally up to you. But I think having the writing in the background gives it a little bit of something. And if the paper had been where I could have the writing going across instead of that direction, I probably would look for a paper that way. Or do an image transfer where the writing would be that direction. Okay. That's this project. I'm titling it Dream. New surface on my website to come soon. I think by the time this video is out, it will be on there. So thank you so much for painting with me. And you've got the other side, by the way, to paint something else on. So you can have this for your spring. And you can put something winter or fall on the back and just flip your surface around when you're ready to change for the seasons. I think it is adorable. So thank you all so very much for painting with me, and I'll see you on the next one.